Alright, I'm back. So our question was, is 5 earthquakes considered a normal year? We need to take this and think about the mean plus 2 standard deviations. So we can say a mean of 1.6 plus 2 times 1.2649. So that means we go up to about 4.13. Or I can say 1.6 minus 2 times 1.2649. So negative 0.9. And we mentioned on the previous problem what it means when there's a negative here. That means I can't have negative earthquakes, so mathematically, technically it's there, but for all practical purposes, that means it's 0. So that means any year where I have somewhere between 0 and 4 earthquakes would be considered a normal year. Remember, the average was only 1.6. That was in the data that was given to me by the U.S. Geological Society. So any year that I have 0 to 4, we would call that a normal year. However, if I have a year that has 5 earthquakes, we would say that's an unusual year, unusually high. There's 95% chance that I'm going to have between 0 and 4. So that means I'm out there in less than 5% chance that I'm going to have 5 earthquakes. That's not a normal year. Well, it gets a little bit more crazy than that. Let's use our calculator to find the exact probability of 5 earthquakes. Again, we're using a Poisson distribution, so I can go second distribution. It's right here above the variables. Oops, sorry, I hit the wrong button. Second distribution, Poisson PDF. Oh, it didn't give me my little wizard this time. I'll do this. Second distribution, Poisson PDF. There we go. So I put my 1.6 in here for my mean, and my standard deviation, it'll automatically calculate it because it's the square root of that. And I'm trying to find out what is the likelihood that I'm going to have 5 earthquakes. So I could have, if I just knew that syntax, I could have just typed it in Poisson PDF. 1.6 is my mean, and 5 is my target value, the one I'm looking for. And this tells me that there is just a little over a 1% chance, almost less than 2% chance that I would be over here outside of this at exactly 5. So 2% chance. It's a pretty unlikely thing. I definitely would not consider that to be normal. In 2010, there wasn't just 5 recorded earthquakes. There were 35. Now we just said 5 earthquakes. There was a 2% chance that that happens. What is the probability that there were 35 earthquakes? Now this really did happen. There really are 5 recorded earthquakes. The U.S. Geological Society, has measured that and recorded it, has evidence of that. But according to what had happened over the previous 20 years, remember from 1978 to 1999, they had been having only about 1 or 2. Suddenly we have 35. What's the likelihood of this happening? Use what we were just doing with your calculator. Alright, in your calculator we just found the probability that I had 5 right. If I scroll up here, get that same little thing listed out, and instead of 5 I replaced that with a 35. We can see that the probability is minuscule. That's 0.000033 zeros and then a 2. well under 1%. So we can say the probability of 35 earthquakes is basically 0. It's not 0, but might as well say it's 0. I mean, we're talking about a number that's so crazy small. So what's the probability that that happens? It's basically 0. Now here's where it gets even more crazy. So this was in 2010, there were 35 earthquakes. 2014, there's 375 earthquakes. What do you think that probability is? Find it. Hopefully by this point, you're realizing the calculator's doing most of the work for you if you can figure out what to type in here. So we got 375 earthquakes. We're still doing the Poisson distribution. And even the calculator threw its hands in the air and said 0. Technically it's not 0. There would be, I suppose, some minuscule chance, but for all intents and purposes is 0. It's probably about the same probability that I get bitten by the shark at the same time that I get hit by lightning, at the same time that a tornado comes and blows my house over, at the same time that my girlfriend breaks up with me, at the same time that, you know, all these things happening simultaneously. We're talking about, it's not going to happen in my lifetime that all of those would happen at the same time. It's also not equally unlikely that there were 375 earthquakes. However, there really were. If you think back to what we were talking about the test on the binomial distribution, we said anytime I venture outside of this normal range, that means something else was happening. Maybe you actually knew some data and you weren't just guessing. So again, there really were 375 earthquakes. That's well outside of my normal range. It's basically saying it's impossible that there were that many, but yet there really were. What does that tell us? Well, that tells us that there were some kind of outside forces acting upon this. Something else was causing this. We're not going to have 375 earthquakes just because it's a fluky year. It's so fluky, something else must be acting. And you can see here is the actual data. We're hanging out at 1.6 for so many years, and then at 1 and 0 and 3. I mean, things were just kind of cruising along, no problem. And all of a sudden right here, things kind of take off. And here's that year where we had 375, just recently. So something is happening here. Well, you didn't have all the data, but this is right in here is when they started doing fracking. They started drilling into the soil to get the natural gas and the oil. And there's a lot of people who see this correlation that right as the fracking starts, suddenly we get all of these crazy, unusual number of earthquakes. Now that doesn't prove that the fracking did it, but the fact that they both started at the same time, that leads to some suspicion.